Welcome back to another episode of Digital Voices with Bo Tiffany. We talk about what's on our hearts and what's on our mind, and every once in a while I get lucky enough to interview an amazing guest. That guest is here with us today, and her name is Aruna Krishnan. Aruna is a strategy consultant and also a best-selling author and podcast host. She has a Busy Mind book series along with her podcast, Lead That Thing. She covers leadership topics and competencies, and her company, OPTIM, works with small business owners to define business and product strategies that increase their revenue and growth. She's had over 15 years of experience in the technology field and leads efforts with large corporations to define, design, and deliver high-quality products for her customers. Aruna's main mission in life is to lift up people by helping them find themselves, happiness, and success, and also by educating and encouraging them through her content, stories, and inspiration. So with that said, I'd like to wish a warm welcome to Aruna Krishnan. Thank you so much for coming on my podcast, Aruna. So to start with, I guess, how did you start this journey? Where are you from originally? I know you have an interesting story.
I appreciate that. Sure, I can share a little bit of, so definitely my dad got a job in Zambia, which is like southern central Africa. He was an accountant, so that was a great opportunity for him. So that it was really cool in the sense that people were really nice, and I mean that makes a huge difference. And they were very much welcoming. And I think at that time, so my dad moved to Zambia. The family moved to Zambia in the 70s, and the reason for that was at that time they needed skilled labor, so things like accountants and that type of skill, which wasn't necessarily present at that time. So I went to school there and pretty much blended. But so I guess the one thing to note there, then I was very much a minority there. So you experience that type of culture too, where you're unique, right? And in my classroom, I might have been the only Indian at the time, but people were friendly. But there was a culture difference.
Wow! So that must have been a culture shock to come to the States out of America. Then, how was that for you?
Transition, because I had already been outside, so it wasn't a terrible culture shock. But one thing I did like was just the openness, and I think what I caught on to was quickly just the embracing of different cultures and the curiosity, which I really liked when I came in, and sharing some of my background. Is that people were very friendly. So that was the first thing I noticed, extremely friendly. Because, coming from Africa, it's just a different culture. Everybody's really nice, but let's say you walk into a store, it's just that culture of customer service, and it's almost overwhelming in the beginning because you're just not used to it, but then you get used to it. And it was pretty nice. I really liked it when I first came in, but definitely a slight adjustment.
Sure. So what got you into writing this book series, Busy Mind?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. So if I have to actually go back about 10 years, because I was at a really low point in my life, and I'm actually only starting to recognize that was symptoms of depression. I didn't know that at the time because I guess it wasn't really something that was an open topic necessarily, or that I knew of in my immediate family. But I was definitely at a very low point, and the triggers were to do with some of the relationships in my life just not going really well, or not being as nurturing as I would have liked. So I felt really down, and there's a little bit of despair, and I just recognized that there was this need to change, and I knew it had to be a change in how I approached life. So that was the only solution for me that I thought of, was partly because I didn't really know what was happening with me. So then I went on this journey of exploration in terms of research because I guess I've always been an analyst. So it's like I went to the library, I looked at all these books, and actually went and researched all different types of spirituality. So whether it was Hinduism to start with, which I'm Hindu by birth, and then Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Sikhism. And it was very interesting because the core message in all of them that I drew out was that ultimately reaching that moment of peace, the moment of happiness is to do with how we see things. So it's really within us and the power is within us. And there was a bit of a journey there. So what I ended up embracing was mindfulness because I just knew that was very easy to implement. I didn't need a whole lot of preparation for that, but just go on that journey. Mm-hmm. And that first book, so which came really about 8 years after that whole journey of embracing mindfulness and seeing the change in my life and seeing myself come out of that depression and mending those relationships or handling those relationships better, and actually which ended up mending those because the people that maybe those relationships weren't working, they started to actually, the relationship just started to work, and maybe a lot of it was to do with how I was handling them and how I started to understand what they were going through. So when I came out on the other side, I felt like I really needed to share this journey because I can't be the only one going through this, and definitely it worked for me. So I believed in what I did, and I believed this was one way for people to find happiness just because I saw other family members suffering the same thing, hanging on to the past, struggling with relationships. And then I just saw like this reflection, like I said, I know I can help these people. So then beyond family, I said, I want to put my thoughts in this book and share it with people who might not be sharing their struggles with other people or might not have a way of solving their problems or may think that they're alone.
Right.
So the first book which I wrote, which was Stop, Wait, Go, is really like is how I ended up processing things coming out of that mindfulness journey.
Sure.
Which is really like controlling your thoughts. So the interesting thing is I knew I had to write it in a way that was very approachable. I didn't want it to be a Buddhist textbook. I didn't want people to be afraid to pick it up. I wanted it to be very simple. So the way I've written it is like a high schooler can pick it up and be able to relate to it. And so can someone in their retirement, they can relate to it as well, because I've used an analogy to traffic lights. So if I just describe this, a traffic light, a busy intersection without traffic lights is going to result in utter chaos. So think about that busy intersection as your mind. And if you don't have traffic lights in your mind, of course, you're going to have chaos in your mind, and the way you're going to act is not going to be probably ideal in most situations. So I walked through how you can apply those traffic lights to your mind and demonstrating it with different scenarios, life-like scenarios and life-like relationships, and how that really can benefit and help grow your emotional intelligence or your calmness in many situations. So that was really the driver for the first book.
Wow, that's a great way to kind of channel your experiences. That's amazing. What are the biggest tools that you picked up through those experiences that you're expressing within the book?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is what really came out. There may be a couple key lessons, but I think the biggest thing that resolved a lot of my relationships is building that empathy. To be able to look at the other person's side of the story, which is not a natural thing, and it requires a little bit of training of the mind. Because I think it's the way we go through life, if something upsets us, the first thing we want to do is say, like, that person upset us. We don't immediately think about, well, what caused this person to act this way, right? Perhaps they had a bad day. Like, let's think about the most common relationship, a couple, where you're the most closest to your spouse, and if they behave in a certain way, your first thing is to be like, why would you do that? But this approach is really take a step back, slow down, and see like, well, why are they acting this way? Is it something that's causing it? Because then you might understand that, okay, they had a bad day, they had work was very stressful, and then you start to develop that empathy, and you're like, okay, well, maybe I actually need to help this person. Like, okay, hey, do you want to talk about this or things like that? And there's only positive that comes out of that. You showing them empathy, and that they start to appreciate what you're doing for them, and that relationship just starts to mend. Right. But of course, yeah, I mean, just to say that's something that in some cases takes more time. It could take months, or it could even take years. But you feel good about it because you've not wasted your energy feeling stressed out and angry, and you lashed out unnecessarily. Mm-hmm. You've saved your energy, and you've just let out more positive emotions, and you've actually mended the relationship. So I think that's one of very eye-opening in most of the relationships that I've seen.
Yeah. Well, in finding empathy, you find a different point of view and perspective, which leads you to understand and hopefully connect better with the other person.
Yeah, right. Correct.
Yeah, it's it's a tool that I think is important. Empathy is something that some people don't have, but I think it's something that you can learn. It's just about being sensitive to your environment and the ones around you, and trying to put yourself in their shoes a little bit. So I think that's great.
Absolutely.
And especially having your experiences in Africa and then in Europe. Coming over here, I think that you're bringing a certain perspective that we don't have because we haven't had those experiences, and being able to express it within this book series, I think is great. So tell me about your podcast. You said you started that this year.
Oh, yeah.
It's called Lead That Thing, just to plug that again.
Right.
Tell me about that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, sure. So so I lost my job back in March due to coronavirus. And so I had that journey of trying to find a job, and it was extremely stressful. And I know there's millions of people looking for jobs right now, but there was a lot of rejection, a lot of negativity. And I just usually have to channel my mind to something so that I'm not down in that feeling down, or I'm not in that state for very long. But what it did for me is it gave me time to figure out what are some of the things I can look at. So how that podcast actually got launched was I was writing my latest book, which was also called Lead That Thing, and I was interviewing leaders for that book. And when I was listening back to the audio from my interviews from the leaders, I really felt that there was so much quality information in there that I thought, hey, this would be great for podcasts and for people to hear just more of the raw conversations with these leaders. And that's how I launched the podcast. So the podcast is really intended to inspire aspiring leaders and help other leaders listen to leaders and help grow themselves. So that's really what I focus on my podcast is people that are leaders in a true sense, people that are helping provide leadership advice to others and also help others be successful, because truly that is a leader to me, is someone who helps grow other leaders. I think that's a very defining quality for me as a leader. So that's what I've been doing with the podcast.
That's amazing. It sounds like the skills that you picked up along the way. I mean, obviously you have a company called OPTIM as well, and you work with small business owners to define business and personal strategies to increase their revenue and growth. These tools that you've brought to the table, then you're kind of bringing forth within the podcast for future leaders. I think that's
Right.
amazing. It's kind of
Thank
helping
you.
groom them and mentor them in a way to give them the tools as they're up and coming. So I think that's amazing.
Right.
So let me dig a little bit at
Right.
you. You, my dear, are an entrepreneur. You seem to put yourself into a million different things, all very productive. How did you get to be like that? Is that something that comes from the family and the core values that you brought, or how did you get to be the person that you are?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So just to get myself in, I probably take on too much at a time, but I think it's just, coming out of that journey that I shared with you, it really changed my attitude towards life, and if I can add this, I guess this will give you some color on where I go with that is, so after I came out on my spiritual journey, or after I embraced that spiritual journey, I started to explore different things. And I think I was looking for personal growth. So I ran a marathon, I did a triathlon, I skydove. Well, that was just for fun. It wasn't so much for personal growth. But this kind of falls in that vein as well, that, I want to explore, I want to grow, I want to learn. So the entrepreneurship is pretty much in its infancy, but what it's done is I've met a lot of people, these small business owners, and that has opened a lot of doors. I've found many avenues to meet new people and to get people on my podcast. And same with the books. It was exploring, experiencing growth and exploring my abilities. Because for the longest time, I actually suffered from imposter syndrome. And that was a big one that actually kept me from really branching out, because I guess I always doubted, or no, actually I should say that differently. I never actually recognized what I was capable of. But coming out of my journey, it started to clear things up for me. And going through some of those athletic journeys, it really cemented for me that, you know what, I can really do whatever I set my mind to. And I think that's where I am today. And that's the person I am today because of all those things that I've experienced. So I continue to do these things to challenge myself.
So you said it's called imposter syndrome. Was that what you called it? I've never heard of that. Tell me what that is.
Oh, imposter syndrome. Yeah. So that's actually a concept that a lot of people experience. So what that really means is people have a lot of challenge, but they're just unable to acknowledge or recognize that. And even if they do, so let me give you an example. So I wrote my first book, but I felt really uncomfortable even calling myself an author, because I was like, well, writing comes super easy, and I sort of did this, and is this really a big deal? So it was really questioning, like really trivializing my achievements. But then even prior to that, it was in every job that I did great, but I took it for granted because I thought that, hey, everybody can do this. Like my ability to communicate. Like I know that people used to compliment me like, wow, you're a great communicator, or, oh yeah, you really know how to organize things. But it comes so natural where you're like, is this, well, I don't know that I'm doing anything special. And so it's just that inability to acknowledge that you're good. And so then that actually prevents you from pursuing things, because you're like, I'm not so sure that I necessarily fit in that type of role. And so I really maybe denied myself from opportunities because of that. And for me, I think I really just got rid of that like 2-3 years ago. After it actually took those athletic journeys to do it, because once you do a marathon or you do a triathlon, then it's almost like, yeah, you're really a small percentage of people that are trying something different and you're being successful. So for me, that's when I was able to shed that feeling of imposter syndrome, because it really showed me who I truly was and the strength that I truly had. And what it came down to is I really realized that, whatever I set my mind to, I can move forward with it, regardless of it's a success or, in quote, failure. I mean, and the way I define failure is just an opportunity to learn. I don't call it failure. So
right.
I guess it's sort of a freeing thing when you have that type of mindset.
No, I can completely understand with that. I think that that's a really healthy way to look at that. It's, I think it's interesting how there's some people just have this innate drive inside of them that propels them. Those challenges that make you grow, focusing on self, and focusing on spirit. And those challenges help to kind of define you, or at least help you to define yourself, to know your strengths and your weaknesses. Definitely. And the perspective, the perspective that you're bringing to it too is like cup half full, where failure isn't a failure, it's an opportunity to grow. And so I think a lot of things in life are based on perspective too, and it's one of those things on changing your perspective. If your perspective is one that's negative, then try to find a different way to look at it. How do you teach? Yeah. Do you teach that within your book series? Do you talk about that in your podcast?
Yeah, I think definitely. Like the first book was much more on the mindfulness type of on the mindfulness side of things, where you might be seeing a situation a certain way, that's where the stop, wait, and go is. So the stop is stop yourself, make sure you calm yourself down in a situation. The wait is the analysis, and that's where you can get true perspective on, are you looking at this in the right way? And once you go through that analysis and then you really have done justice to that, then you go, because then you go with the right intention and it's not an emotional reaction. So that's really probably where I teach that. And the point is, it might sound like, well, I don't have time to stop, wait, and go for everything I do. But in the initial phases, it might feel like you have to be intentional, and you have to slow down your reaction. But the more you do it, it could be instantaneous, because in your mind, you know what you're doing. You're going through that analysis really quickly, and then when you act, it's not emotional, it's much more rational.
Yeah. Well, and I think the end result of that process is learning how to believe in yourself, right? Rather than thinking like that imposter syndrome, thinking that you're not that person, but then realizing, what you really are. And
yeah,
no, go ahead.
No, I was going to say there's so much power in self-reflection. I think that has really given me so many answers. And as I talked about in my journey, the first couple of years, at least the first 2 years, I had to do meditation in a very true sense of it. And it's amazing, because what that did for me was a lot of cleansing. I let go of a lot of baggage. And, anytime you have a problem, really, if you just sit and think about it, now it's become a little not as structured, but it's like, even if I sit in bed and close my eyes for 5 minutes and you just think about the day or whatever is bothering you, you just realize that things are not as bad as they necessarily are, in most cases. And the power of self-reflection, I can't even emphasize enough. And you absolutely nailed it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's hard sometimes to look at yourself, and I always look at it like the ABC soup analogy, where, when you're swimming in the bowl of ABC soup, hanging on to a letter, it's really hard to see that it spells help unless you're looking from a ways away. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's interesting. So finding people mentors, people that you want to model after, people that might inspire you given your particular situation. So maybe they've gone through it themselves. Networking, meeting, and interacting with them tends to help with that growth as well. For myself, I had certain mentors as I grew up, people that I appreciated and admired and wanted to be like. And so I found that in order to be like them, you have to develop some of the same healthy patterns, that they have. And it brings you into that place where, you learn by socializing. That's one of the things that shaped me a lot. How about you? Do you have mentors? Who inspired you along the way?
That's interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't really say that from a personal perspective that I had mentors. I think a lot of it was a self-discovery journey, because I think I'm really very different in the sense that just my way of thinking is different from a lot of people, let's say, in my community or even in my family. I think that goes back to the places that I grow up, and I think it's just given me diverse perspectives in life, and even just with my personal experiences. So a lot of that has been self-discovery and, leading my way. And that's why I named my podcast Lead That Thing, because I want to provide that example to other people and that inspiration to other people. But definitely I have been inspired on the professional side of things. There have been certain leaders where I have admired because I see how they, carry themselves. So in every job that I've had, there's certain leaders and I admire. And one quality that they all have is humility. I really have a lot of respect for the leaders that they achieve so much, but yet they're so humble.
I agree.
And and definitely on this entrepreneurship journey, I'm in a couple of networks, and I admire all these ladies that have their businesses and are growing their businesses. I'm definitely learning something every day from each of them.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's that networking and socializing, you're being around like people. And it's funny when you get a group of us together, what comes out of that sometimes. Is that true with you too?
Right.
Yeah. It inspires me. I get inspired by my peers. I get inspired, and I get a little extra kick to my drive, with certain people in my life, and it just helps propel the whole thing. So,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, tell me, I guess, a little bit more. What are you going to be focused on the next 6 months? You just got done with the book series. You're running a business. You got your podcast. What's in the future for Aruna?
Yeah, so I guess if I'm thinking about the next 6 months, my latest book is getting released in November, and I would like to see that get distributed to more people and, do more of that. And I already have an idea for my next book, and it'll be a collaboration with my daughter. So pretty excited about that. Okay. So there'll be more to come on that. And I think that'll be a very, very relevant book given the time that we're going through and given the issues that we're all dealing with. So definitely excited about that. And
I'm glad you brought that up. How has COVID? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You just brought up about the times that we're living in, and I wanted to ask how has COVID affected you and your family?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, I think the biggest thing is definitely with us all being at home. So my husband and I are working from home. So I also am with a client right now on the IT side. So We both have the luxury of working from home. And my daughter is back at school, but, you know, I just have to bring up, like, it's really obvious that it affects all of us in the sense of mental well-being. This is not normal, right? And we're not able to function normally. We miss all the social interaction.
Right.
There's all this restriction, and we have to admit that, being stuck in a house, you'll go out for groceries or whatever, the bare minimum stuff that you need to go out for, it doesn't feel healthy. And with my daughter being teenagers, and you look at all these high schoolers, and I hear these stories, it's really hard on them. And I just feel for them. I really feel for them. It's a tough age. And I really think it's so important for us to be there for them and just be aware of what they're going through, because they are going through stuff that is beyond just your normal teenage, in quotes, behavior. And I think it's so important for us as parents to recognize that and support them. And hopefully we will come out of this on the positive side. But I think that's been the biggest thing, other than, and my job loss actually seems so pale in comparison to, watching my daughter going to school. And, it's tough. I know the schools are trying, nothing to take away from them, but it is very tough on these kids. And I feel really bad for that.
Yeah, the mental health of everyone in our country right now, and in fact the world, has definitely been affected. That cabin fever, especially through summer, you're used to your social interactions and seeing your friends and family and having events and things like that socially, and most everything was canceled this year. So it's been rough.
Right.
We're living through an interesting time, not only with COVID, but then the last few years of politics within our country has been extremely stressful for the majority of the country.
Right. And I feel so bad about it. Like, I really feel so bad. And, part of it is you just think, I'm not huge into politics, but you just feel like there's something so basically wrong, and people in a country should not be divided, and it should not be divided like this. We should all be coming together rather than and coming up with solutions, like how can we solve this, rather than let's point the finger. Because, like, the truth is, and this is what I think, that there's no one person that can wave a magic wand and solve this problem, right? I mean, I would really hope, regardless of what type of, which side of the aisle that you favor, I think this is an opportunity for everyone to come together to solve this humongous problem, right? But I'm not seeing that. I'm just seeing so much negativity, and I just don't think that's productive. I don't think that's productive at all.
What do you think is driving it? I mean, we have a lot of fake news and disinformation, and we're dealing with a lot of extras on top of the norm, I think, which influence people too. There's such a divide amongst even my own friends, politically.
Right.
And, what is it that's repelling us rather than bringing us together, in your opinion?
Yeah, so that's, I think it's like this ingrained thing from years and years. And again, I'm going to disclaim and say that I'm not an expert in politics, and
no, and it doesn't need to be
giving you the most.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily need to be like politically inclined. It's just we have a civil unrest amongst us. I think there's a lot of people that are unhappy. I'm just wondering, instead of a lot of places, they come together and they unify. And like you mentioned, we're tending to kind of fragment and spread apart. And I'm wondering why that is, through the lens of what you bring to the table.
And I think it has to be like an ownership at the individual level first. Like, each of us has have to do our part. And there has to be, let's start from school. Even at a school perspective, there has to be constant education. There has to be that constant awareness. And not so much in a controversial way, but just like it goes back to that awareness and that empathy, because I was talking to someone the other day, and I think that's the core thing that's missing and that causes all this is empathizing. Because I feel like if we all empathize towards each other, we would have world peace in just a second. But that's not happening, right? We all have our own things, and we want to worry about just our perspective, and that's just not helping. And there are problems out there. Let's admit there are problems out there, but how are we going to solve that? And definitely it has to be, we have to feel that need to solve it. We as individuals each need to watch what we do and be aware of, are we making this problem better, or are we making this problem worse? And certainly if we are in position, we can, and I think that's where we can influence, right? And if we're in actual positions where we can make a difference, like from a much higher level, then those are the people that also have to be, applying their leadership skills and their influence to make that difference. But I think we all have a part to play to make this better.
I agree. I think one of the big problems is ethics and business don't go together very well, because you're always interested in the bottom line for your stockholders. And as a result, you're interested in the bottom line comes at the cost of perhaps sacrificing some ethics or morals or responsibilities that you would have otherwise instituted. As a leader, how do you shape our young ones to enhance their leadership qualities by embracing a little bit more empathy, or a little bit more focus than just on the bottom line? Is there a way to have a coexistence of both? Can you have ethics in business and be responsible and yet still make a profit for your stockholders?
Yeah, and I think definitely observing some of the high schoolers and their responses to what has been going on is they are, it's an age of information, right? And they're overloaded with much more information than probably I am, or any one of us are, just with social media. And I see them creating these groups where they want to educate. So I believe in my daughter's high school, they've created a group where they want to create awareness for, racial diversity and things like that. So I think they're growing up in this time and seeing all the problems, and even at a micro level, right? It makes them much more aware and much more responsible, way earlier in life than maybe, for me or for you, how it wasn't so much in our face, but now it's in their face. And that's something they're not going to forget. And, even if you think about the school system, there's so much opportunity for leadership, even starting from high school. And definitely, I think the younger leaders are going to make a huge impact, and I really hope that they start to shape things differently, because they're always going to think about some of the current issues and be aware of those when they're moving forward in their lives.
Yeah, one of the big things that I'm waiting for a change on within the industry, and I'm starting to see it a little bit. I'm curious on your opinion. Is the climate change aspect of things. Even though America has withdrawn from a lot of our different policies, and we're still independently making leaps and strides where the personal organizations have decided to do things rather than being mandated to federally. So I see some changes there. I'm hoping, though, with this new crop of leaders, if you will, that's going to be a bigger concern. I think that the issues that our current youth are coming into, especially as our young adults and our young leaders, that they have to tackle are extraordinarily large in scope. I know that throughout history we've had some big issues, but right now I feel we have a lot of things on the table that we've never had before that could really affect our future.
Right.
So, one of the things that I find it overwhelming. I wonder how our young leaders feel about it. Are they overwhelmed with the things that are in front of them? How are they dealing with it? What are you seeing on our youth?
Yeah, so what I'm seeing is, I see an awareness of those issues. So the people that are actually shining as leaders, I'm seeing two camps. So there's definitely the overwhelming and not really knowing how to act, but then I'm also seeing then people that are noticing these problems and that are taking that initiative. And then I guess those are the true, those are the people that have that innate leadership skills earlier in life. That they're going out there making initiatives and creating that awareness and moving those initiatives forward, like even in their own school or even in their own colleges, just creating that awareness and bringing people along. Because people just learn best when it's from their peer age group, right? So whether in high school they have some, clubs like that, and just getting those like-minded people to do that, and then the school. And the school can definitely do its part to promote some of that and then help educate the rest of the school and then start to encourage people to be a part of that movement. So there's definitely a lot more of that, which is a good thing.
I've been really impressed with that Greta Thunberg. Are you familiar with her? She's the little girl from Sweden, the climate change activist. At a young age, at a young age, he's already been, in front of our world leaders promoting, change. And so I know that there's more of a social awareness amongst your age group than I think there has been before.
Right.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Well, let me thank you for coming on the podcast. Let me also give you the opportunity to plug. How do we find you? How do our listeners find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Aruna Krishnan. So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. Also on Instagram, my podcast tag is @LeadThatThing. You can find me there as well. Those are probably two of the most common ways you can find me. And definitely want to say thank you for having me on. This was a very interesting conversation.
I want to thank you.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I want to thank you for coming on. I think what you're doing is inspirational. I think that it's great for our youth and our young leaders. And I think the topics that you're covering on your podcast, along with your book series, are really beneficial. And so I want to thank you again and wish you the best of days.
Thank you, Bo.
You're welcome. You have yourself a great day, Aruna.
You too.
All right. Bye now.